My name is Kristina Griffin, and this is the action plan analysis for current trends in elementary education. For my study, I chose to look at direct, explicit spelling instruction in the classroom and how it affects student achievement. Dictation tests show little retention of spelling patterns in my fifth grade classroom. The problem this study will address is low student achievement due to a lack of direct spelling instruction in fifth grade students at Morris Avenue Intermediate School. On test 1, 72% of students were proficient. On test 2, 56% of students were proficient. On test 3, 61% of students were proficient. On test 4, only half of the students were proficient. Most of the class was proficient less than 1/4 of the time. After reviewing this data, there is an obvious spelling proficiency issue in a fifth grade classroom at Morris Avenue Intermediate School. The problem that I will focus on is whether or not direct instruction is a better method for teaching spelling patterns. The graph above highlights the lack of proficiency because there was only one test in which the majority of students were proficient in spelling the words on the dictation tests. There's a clear pattern in the other 3 tests. The majority were not proficient in correct spelling. The problem this study will address is low student achievement due to a lack of direct spelling instruction in fifth grade students. Although Morris Avenue Intermediate School has a rating of a high B, the school's most recent data for reading proficiency was 50%. This means that only half of the school's student population was proficient in reading. Due to the previously stated connections between spelling and reading, writing, and comprehension, it is safe to assume that spelling could potentially be a reason for this deficit. The participant sample of this study will encompass 18 fifth graders at Morris Avenue Intermediate School in the school year of 2020-2021. There are 10 female students and 8 male students, all between the ages of 10 and 12. Given that the study will take place in one fifth grade classroom, the sampling technique that I will use will be the convenience sampling. Students will be randomly placed in the control group or the experimental group. One of the groups will continue to receive their normal spelling instruction during their center time. The other group will receive direct, explicit spelling instruction from me during the time that the other students complete their spelling in centers. The group who receives spelling instruction in centers will be the control group because this instruction will be no different from their normal instruction. The group that will be taught spelling explicitly is the experimental group. The instruments that I will be using in the study are the 2 dictation tests. The first test will be administered at the end of the first 3 weeks. The second dictation test will be administered at the end of the 6-week study period. This is the normal procedure for administering dictation tests. These tests are valid because they are written by our reading coaches and sent to all fifth grade classes in our school to use. Each of these tests has 5 sentences that the teacher reads aloud. Each sentence has 2 spelling words from the previous 3 weeks. Another instrument that I will use is the Frere model. This graphic organizer will be used with the experimental group. This is used to organize their new learning about the spelling words. The last instruments I will use is the review spelling game and worksheets. The review game activity that the experimental group will play is valid because it is made by me and uses the spelling words in our reading curriculum. The worksheets that both groups will use are also created by our school's reading curriculum. The collaborated resources that will be used for this assignment are the worksheets, spelling review game, spelling sort, and Frere model. The spelling pattern worksheets are done with the partner and reading centers. The control group will use these. The spelling review game will be completed with partners on Fridays. Both the control group and the experimental group will participate in the spelling sorts. These are done with partners as well. Lastly, the Frere model is an activity that will be completed with a partner as well. Pairs will work together to break down word meanings and create their definition, sentences, pictures, and lists of antonyms and synonyms. This study will take place over the course of 6 weeks. At the end of each 3-week mark, students will take a dictation test on the last 3 spelling skills discussed previously. The scores from these dictation tests will be used in the study. This timeline follows the normal timeline for dictation tests. There are 2 dictation tests in each quarter. These tests always test the 3 most recent spelling skills using words from the spelling list from previous weeks. Half of the data will be reflective of the traditional spelling instruction and reading centers, and the other half of the data from the dictation test will be reflective of the students who received explicit spelling instruction. Both sets of data from these groups will be compared to see whether or not the experimental group showed increased academic achievement on these tests. First and foremost, the parental consent form should be sent home and returned signed. This ensures that an attempt has been made to disclose their students' involvement in the study and that they are okay with it. As soon as all forms have been signed and returned, the study can begin. All students in this classroom will be learning the same spelling skills at the same time. The control group will continue to learn the spelling skills they normally do. Each week, that group will be given a new skill practice page which involves them using a word bank to first spell the words correctly, sort them under correct categories based on commonalities in the spelling, matching them with antonyms or synonyms, and completing fill-in-the-blank sentences with the correct vocabulary word. These pages are completed in about 2 days during reading centers. They are not tested on the words until 3 weeks into the quarter on their dictation test. The experimental group will meet with me daily for 15 minutes at a time to receive explicit spelling instruction. On Monday, the students will be introduced to the spelling pattern and work with me to spell the words correctly. Tuesdays will be spent physically sorting the words that have been printed on word strips. This differs from the control group because the experimental group will have to discover on their own how to sort them rather than be told how to sort them. Wednesdays will be spent completing a Frere model on the word. They pick a word from the spelling list and complete a graphic organizer defining the word, illustrating the word, and listing synonyms and antonyms for it. On Thursday, they will pick 5 other words to use correctly in sentences that they create. Finally, on Friday, they will play a review spelling game and pick the correct spellings of each word. They will take the same dictation test at the same time as the control group. This data will show whether spelling patterns are retained better with direct instruction. The instruments that I will be using in this study are the 2 dictation tests. These tests are valid because they are written by our reading coaches and sent to all 5th grade classes in our school to use. Each of these tests has 5 sentences that the teacher reads aloud. Each sentence has 2 spelling words from the previous 3 weeks. The last instruments I will use is the review spelling game and worksheets. The review game activity that the experimental group will play is valid because it is made by me and uses the spelling words in our reading curriculum. The worksheets that both groups will use are also created by our school's reading curriculum. Given that dictation tests are based on spelling, there is no room for judgment calls. The grading is very straightforward and there is no room for interpretation. Every student in my 5th grade classroom will be taking the same dictation tests and graded in the same manner. No one other than me will see the results of these dictation tests in relation to any particular students. Furthermore, I will ensure that when results are discussed or displayed, none of my students' names are attached to the data. This will be done in order to keep all students' information private. Parents' permission will be given through a consent form. This form will also detail why administering this type of instruction in a study is important and reiterate the value of collecting data from the study. ELL population will receive modifications according to the learning plan. Students with IEPs will take dictation tests with resource teachers. Given that some students come in with more background knowledge concerning spelling, I cannot control who lacks background knowledge that others have. Some students grow up being encouraged to read and are given many options, and others are not. More often than not, children who read more are better spellers. Additionally, if students are absent during the time I am teaching these spelling lessons or reading center time, they are missing spelling instruction. I cannot control students who are chronically absent. The majority of schools across the United States stop delivering explicit spelling instruction after 2nd grade. Data shows that this causes a plunge in spelling proficiency, as it is not a skill that can simply develop on its own in consequence of other forms of reading skills. Given this common trend in reading deficits, it is possible that lack of direct, explicit spelling instruction could be harmful to spelling progression, as well as other academic progress. Furthermore, literature supports that explicit spelling instruction is necessary in order to continue spelling progression after primary years. One study referenced in my paper evaluated the effects of explicit and implicit instruction on dative alternation. In this study, students who received explicit instruction showed greater achievement than those who received implicit instruction. Being that the focus of the study was similar to the focus of this study, it is reasonable to consider the explicit instruction learning approach as a viable option for academic achievement in spelling. Many researchers have stated that there are clear benefits from continued explicit spelling instruction. Learning to spell new words does not end after second grade. In this study, one group, the control group, will continue to receive indirect spelling instruction. The experimental group will receive direct spelling instruction from the teacher. At the end of the study, both groups will take the same 2 dictation tests in hopes that data shows growth in the experimental group. Based on research done previously, I believe that students in this study who receive direct, explicit instruction will show increased achievement on dictation tests. This would highlight the benefits of continued explicit spelling instruction and greatly impact spelling proficiency at Morris Avenue Intermediate School. This study is intended to identify whether or not direct explicit spelling instruction produces better results than indirect spelling instruction in a 5th grade classroom. The collaborative resources used during this research will more intentionally teach spelling patterns with the goal of increasing academic achievement on dictation tests. In my original plan, I explained that I would split a class randomly and compare the 2 groups within the same class. If I were to change something, I would perform the study on 2 classes instead. One class would receive their traditional instruction, the other class would receive modified instruction. That is more direct and explicit in teaching spelling. I believe this is more manageable for teachers. If I were to add to my research, I would like to compare other studies done on explicit instruction across subjects, not just studies focused on spelling instruction. I would also look into various forms of spelling instruction.